Can we get started?
Yeah. Hello,
All right.
everyone. Hello, everyone. We are delighted to have Emily Tom today with us. I would like to welcome Emily and all of you on behalf of IIBA Vancouver chapter for this speaker section. Emily will be taking on the topic, Tell Me What You Are Really Thinking. Please expect this section to last till 8 p.m., leaving us some time for question and answer. Thank you. First and foremost, we at the IIBA Vancouver chapter acknowledge that the land on which we gathered is the traditional and unceded territory of the Museum, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Quiet First Nation, Kwalent, Kashisemimor, Squaxin First Nation, Kwikweham, Squamish Nation. We thank them for allowing us to meet and learn together on their territory. Housekeeping pro tips. Please mute your devices as we are recording this event. Also, rename your profile to reflect your full name if you have not done so already, so that you will receive your due CDU credits. Okay. We'll be having the welcome message from Sid Anya, the board president of IIBA Vancouver chapter.
Hey, thank you very much for that. Firstly, I would like to thank all of our community members for whom we make this events possible. And so, the power of community and getting people on the events is a paramount aim for us. And so I appreciate everyone who's part of the Vancouver IIBA chapter and that who work with us by way of either sponsorship. So we appreciate the sponsorship of all of our sponsors there, and also for the volunteers who make these events possible. There's a lot of things that happen in the background in terms of making these events come alive. And so I always like to thank the volunteers for everything that they do to make these events possible. And also would like to welcome Emily, who has a ton of experience in guiding the organizations through complexities of requirements gathering and analysis, and her expertise in elicitation, which is one of the core competencies in business analysis, is paramount. And so we definitely are, seeking from today's session, her knowledge and expertise that she would share in terms of mastering the art of drawing out, analyzing, and documenting the requirements to ensure all of the stakeholder needs and are well understood and so on. So let's look forward to the session today. So thank you, Emily, for making the time for us, and thank you, community members, thank you, volunteers, and thank you, sponsors, for helping us through this event today. Back to you.
Thank you. That was a nice welcome message from our president. We are proud winners of 2022 IIBA Chapter Sustainability Awards. This is our second chapter award in the last 3 years. A big thank you to all our members, speakers, board members, sponsors, and volunteers alike for making this achievement possible. Next slide. Our vision: to lead business analysis practitioners in mainland BC. As far as our mission goes, advance the role of business analysis and promote the value provided by these professionals. Support professional development by providing access to forums, discussion groups, study section, webinars, speaker presentation, and workshops. We also try and support business analysis practitioners with IIBA certification by providing access to information and training programs relating to the business analysis body of knowledge. And lastly, we build our communities by encouraging knowledge sharing through networking and social events with fellow business analysis professionals across a range of industries and companies. Yeah. So please go on our YouTube to watch the recording of this event or any of our past events. I believe Kathy shall be dropping the link in the chat box for everyone. And as they say, like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you can be the first to get notification for our new YouTube content. Thank you. We have our sponsors with us today. Ivan Leon from UBC Sauda School of Business. And I don't know if he's here for him to share a few words with us. Ivan Leon, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, and good evening to you. To you all, actually. Pleasure to be here this evening, and to look forward to discuss this discussion on Emily Tom's speaking. Excuse my voice. It's a little rougher than normal. Try to overcome that. But anyways, yes, my name is Evan Lloyd. I'm Associate Program Leader at Sauder, UBC Sauder, CBS. And I'd just like to mention that we've been delivering BA courses since 2008 with the continual pursuit of bringing them up to date and making them modern and applicable to your work, what you do. And also to connect to the fact that IIBA membership has its benefits. Please, I'd like to remind you that all members of our IIBA Vancouver chapter can use our discount code IIBA10 on our website, UBC Sauder website, for all of our BA courses to pursue BA certification or continue on with your PDUs should you require them. There's one more thing I'd like to touch on before turning over the mic, and that's that we are proud to collaborate with IIBA Vancouver chapter on our offering a $1,000 scholarship to one individual. Now, the deadline for that submission is a little bit in the future. Keep this marked on your calendar for future reference. That's August 29th. Thank you for your time and your attention, and turn it back to you.
Yeah, thank you to our sponsors. I would also like to call upon Lauren Pollock from SFU Continuing Studies, our co-sponsor, to also share a few words. Yeah. Okay, thank you to all our sponsors for their invaluable support and dedication. When we do elicitation, it isn't just about being a script. Elicitation helps in identifying stakeholders' need, defining projects, scope, and ultimately delivering a successful solution. Emily will take over from here. Prepare yourself to engage and think outside the box in this section. Emily Tom, CBA, our speaker, about our speaker, Emily Tom, CBA, is an independent consultant based in Ottawa, Canada. She's an aspiring writer and speaker and is passionate about promoting the business analyst profession. She supports fellow business analysts in their careers through knowledge sharing and mentorship. She will take over from here, and I'll be right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Eno, for the wonderful introduction. Thank you for the chapter for welcoming me to come and speak with you. I love being engaged with the different IIBA chapters. I've been a longtime volunteer for IIBA, and I know how the sense of community that we build and the ideas that we share at the chapter level is extremely important and valuable to our careers. So I look forward to being part of the Vancouver chapter here tonight. So with that, I'm gonna kick off my presentation and share. All right, is everyone seeing my cover slide?
Yes.
Okay, great. I wanted to talk tonight about elicitation because it's so key to what we do as business analysts. We try and understand what our stakeholders are thinking about. And what I'd like to talk about is how do we do elicitation and what are some of the challenges that we face? And then how do we overcome those challenges? So our agenda tonight will cover a bit of an introduction about myself so that you can feel free to connect with me and we can continue networking after this event. We'll talk about elicitation, what it is. We'll talk about some challenges and why some of those challenges exist. And I'd like to give a simple game plan on how to do elicitation. It's not necessarily a step-by-step recipe, but I will give you some tips and some techniques that you can use to be awesome elicitors. So about me, it was mentioned that I am based in Ottawa. As you can see, here's a picture of the Rideau Canal. It's known as the longest skating rink in the world. In the past couple of years, it's been a bit challenging with our warmer winters where the canal hasn't frozen over, but you can see that Ottawa, our nation's capital, has many interesting landmarks, including this UNESCO World Heritage Site, the Rideau Canal. As a business analyst, I love working with stakeholders and trying to understand what's on their mind and trying to come up with solutions that make them happy. Trying to understand what they're thinking so that they can feel engaged on the project. So I'm always curious. And that's one of the traits that many of us BAs or aspiring BAs have. We're curious about things. We like to tinker with things and experiment and do our lessons learned. And I invite all of you for this evening to engage with me as well. So if you'd like to put your questions in the chat, I believe Enno will be watching the chat and then asking your question on behalf of yourself, or if you'd like to come off of mute or raise your hand and ask your question live, I'm happy to answer your question. So we have lots of opportunity to interact, so please feel free to jump in if you'd like. I don't know if you've heard your employers or your managers or colleagues talk about gathering requirements. Just go gather requirements, they say, or that piece, we're going to set aside some time to gather requirements. For those of us who are pure BAs, the purists, we might take offense or we might cringe at the words gathering requirements, because gathering requirements implies that the requirements are as easy as picking flowers in a meadow, that the requirements are just laid out in front of you for you to pick up and incorporate into your project. It's not always that simple, is it? So really, what is elicitation? The BABOK, the IIBA Guide to the Business Analysis Body of Knowledge, V3, has this definition. Elicitation is the drawing forth or receiving information from stakeholders or other sources. It is the main path to discovering requirements and design information, and might involve talking to stakeholders directly, researching topics, experimenting, or simply being handed the information. So this definition talks about elicitation not necessarily meaning that the requirements are there for you to just pick up. You have to do some work, to do some discovery, you have to do some digging to really get to the root cause of problems, to really understand what the stakeholders need. And it says here there are different ways to find this information. You're working with stakeholders or you're researching information that is available to you. So we'll talk about how when we do elicitation, it's not always a workshop or it's not always an interview. So as BAs, we have to have a variety of tools in our toolbox to be able to get the information we need in order to advance the project. Any questions so far? Or any thoughts on elicitation versus gathering? Please feel free to put anything in the chat, your thoughts on that. BABOK is a 500-page book. It also talks about elicitation and collaboration as a knowledge area. There are 5 different tasks that we do, or that BABOK prescribes us to do when we do elicitation. The first thing you need to do with any kind of BA work is prepare. You need to prepare for the elicitation. Think about what it is that you want to achieve before you actually go and conduct the elicitation. Think about the scope of the elicitation questions you're going to come out with. Think about who are the stakeholders that you're working with and what are their preferred modes of communication. These are all kinds of things you have to consider when you're doing preparing for elicitation. And once you're sufficiently prepared, then of course you conduct the elicitation. The next thing you should do is confirm the elicitation results. For me, this is extremely valuable because what you're doing is you're talking to your stakeholders and saying, did I hear you right? Is this what you said? And it's going to help you confirm your understanding. Not necessarily that the requirements they gave you are the ones that are actually going to make it into the solution, but you're demonstrating that you're listening to the stakeholders and that you heard what they said so that you can walk out with the proper information. You're also going to communicate business analysis information. What this means is you've taken the elicitation results and you've thought about this information. You've done business analysis on it, various tasks, the requirements management part of it, the validation and verification of requirements. And of course, you have to communicate it back to stakeholders. This is why this knowledge area is called elicitation and collaboration. So what you're doing is you're going back to the stakeholders and you're managing collaboration with them. You're trying to refine the requirements, but not necessarily increase the scope beyond the amount it should be increased, right? You're also going to be working with stakeholders and giving them an opportunity to provide clarification on requirements. So this is where you're doing that collaboration. It's not just a one-stop, it's not just a one and done type of task. You're going to do this iteratively. So why do we need to do these tasks effectively? It looks really complex. Does anyone want to put it in the chat or come off of mute and jump in with why is elicitation important? Any thoughts? What happens if someone hands you a written set of requirements and you just trust that they're correct and you hand those requirements to the people who are supposed to deliver the solution? Can anyone imagine what is the risk? What risks would happen if you just took the requirements verbatim? Any thoughts? You might get the you might not have the right requirements. What about
opportunities for improvement?
Exactly. So you might not really getting the most value out of what they gave you. What happens if you're working with multiple stakeholders and they don't all agree with each other? So you don't have consensus, and then they hand you the requirements. You might end up with requirements that are conflicting. So you see how when we're doing elicitation, we need to pay attention to these things that we need to do. We need to pay attention to what our objectives of the elicitation are. What do we want to walk out the door with in order to have something useful that we can give to the people who provide the solution? What do we want to do so that we respect our stakeholders' time and that we're giving them the opportunity to state their requirements and their concerns and their issues and assumptions? And then it's really important to confirm those results, because sometimes we didn't write the requirement correctly. So it's important to say, did I hear right? So this is why our job as BAs, it can be complex, but we keep working on it because this is the value we bring to our project. We're able to do all these different activities to really home in on what's valuable to our stakeholders. Any questions or thoughts? Please drop in the chat or come off mute. And Eno can also watch the chat box if there are any questions. Let's talk about the real world. Why is elicitation so difficult? So these are some of the things that I have witnessed. I try to manage this or cope with these challenges. Sometimes the scope or the objectives of this project aren't even clear to the stakeholders, or they're not clear to the people we're trying to speak with. If someone doesn't understand the scope, they may give you requirements that don't belong or that are irrelevant. Or maybe they don't understand what the objectives are, so they're not really giving you relevant requirements. And we always know that on projects, there's never enough time, right? So if there's not enough time to do elicitation, you can imagine how much more difficult it could be later in the project, where you're trying to rework and correct some incorrect requirements. I've also seen situations where we don't have access to the appropriate stakeholders. Sometimes we're given a list of names of people that we would be working with in order to elicit requirements, but the people who really have the subject matter expertise, maybe they aren't available, or maybe no one told you that these are the right people to speak with. The other problem that you might see is that stakeholders don't see the value of elicitation. They might say, oh, Emily, just go gather the requirements. It's easy. Or Emily, read this document. These are all the requirements that we came up with 2 weeks ago. So maybe maybe these stakeholders don't see why it's important to go through elicitation. Why should we subject them to a bunch of questions? And that could be because maybe they were burned in the past. Maybe they were on a project that failed and they don't really want to be part of your workshop. Or maybe they participated in an elicitation workshop, but they felt that everything that they gave, every input that they gave was ignored. So these are some challenges that we have to face. And then as BAs, sometimes we also don't get meaningful information. Like I said, if the scope isn't clear, the objectives of this whole project are not clear, maybe we're not getting the requirements that really add value to the solution. Another thing that as BAs, we need to be accountable for is how we go about doing elicitation. Sometimes maybe we're not using the effective techniques. Maybe we're not aware of, we're not cognizant of how we should be interacting with stakeholder A versus stakeholder B. We need to use techniques so that we can develop that relationship, the rapport with the stakeholders. We also know that stakeholders often don't have time. Stakeholders, when they're in a workshop, they're taking time away from their day job to come and sit in a workshop. So sometimes they don't really have time to sit with you and explain things. So we have to start learning how to effectively communicate with them. We also have to learn how to get them involved and engaged. And then another thing that is a problem is that sometimes we're given written information to do document analysis, which is one of the elicitation techniques, but the information's out of date. So you're basing your requirements on out-of-date information, and then down the road, you can see how the solution could fail. It's not easy, is it? Are there any questions or comments? All right, I'll keep moving on. But you know, sometimes things are not easy, and I'm going to make things even worse by showing you the next slide. Sometimes stakeholders can be difficult. Sorry, I mean different. Sometimes stakeholders have different styles. Let's talk about typical stakeholders, and let me know in the chat if you recognize any of these people. You could have Silent Sally or Silent Sam. This is the person who's not participating. They're like zipping their lips. And it could be for various reasons. Maybe they're afraid to speak in a conversation or a meeting or an interview because they feel like their boss is in the room and they don't want to speak freely, or they can't speak freely. So as BAs, we need to be able to create a safe zone for participation. And if any of you have any questions about how do you create that safe zone, put it in the chat and I will be happy to address that. What about scope creep Scotty or scope creep Scotia? This is someone who has lots of amazing ideas, but they go off on a tangent and they take you off on a different path and they start introducing other requirements that are not relevant to our project, or they start adding bells and whistles to our solution. So they take up a lot of time. So one of the things you can do here is work on, one of the techniques you can use is functional decomposition and prioritization. So functional decomposition means that you're looking at what is the business process we're trying to support here with the solution. And then you can break it down into the different functions performed by different stakeholders or stakeholder groups. And then that helps you narrow things down to stick to the job functions, as opposed to going off on tangent and adding bells and whistles. And of course, the BABOK talks about many different prioritization techniques, things like Moscow, for example. You can do prioritization to help say, thank you, Scotty. That's an interesting idea, but we're going to put it on the parking lot just for now, and we'll come back to it if we have time in our project to be able to include that. So you can do prioritization that way. What about Mona or Monroe the monopolizer? This typically happens when you have a group of people in a workshop. So you're not working one-on-one with somebody, but they're in a group of stakeholders. So this is someone who's taking up the whole meeting time to talk about their own part. So in that case, what you can do is thank them for their input and seek input from others. So you can use some balanced points in conversation. You can say, thank you, Monroe. That's a really interesting point. That leads me to something that Joe said over here. So you can go back to Joe and say, Joe, what would you like to contribute to this discussion? So you can gently steer the conversation away and give other people some airtime. What about negative Nellie or negative Nelson? This is someone who says, that'll never work. Oh, this is going to cost too much, or that's too out of the box. We're not going to do it. I wonder if these people have formed that perspective based on some past experiences or concerns that they have. So it's helpful to go to Nellie and say, oh, can you explain why that wouldn't work? Or I know that didn't work in a previous project. Maybe we can look at how we can make it work this time around. So you can work on their concerns. You're not shooting down these folks. You're not saying, oh, thank you, but we're going to go to someone else who believes in the project. You're not doing that. What you're doing is you really are listening to Nellie or Nelson, and you're trying to draw out their concerns because they might have other information that you didn't have. They might have a rationale or reasoning why certain requirements or features didn't work. There's also know-it-all Norma or know-it-all Norman. There are people say, yeah, that's good. Let's move on, and they want to work on something else because, yeah, I've seen this. Let's keep going. This is someone who tries to rush through things because they know everything and they don't give others in the room some time to think about it, digest it, and give their own perspective. So in this case, what I would do is I would challenge this person and say, oh, you seem to know this set of requirements really well. Can you explain how that would work in a business process? Could you explain how this customer base would react to these requirements? So you're challenging their knowledge, or you're asking them to support their perspective by explaining some more. We could also have inconsistent Indra or inconsistent Ingram. I don't know where I came up with these names, but I'm hoping that those of you in the room aren't necessarily named after these people. We also have inconsistent people who sometimes give you different requirements that conflict with each other. They want a yes, or they want a no, or they want red today, blue tomorrow. So sometimes they're sort of scattered. You don't tell them that, but they come up with different ideas that don't match up together. So this is where it's really helpful to validate their input. So, Indra, you explained requirement X. Can you further elaborate how that would fit with requirement Y? We might have a scenario where these two requirements have to work together. Can you explain how that might work together? So you can validate their input, play it back to them, repeat what they said, and they can tell you whether or not these requirements make any sense together. Does this sound, do you recognize any of these folks that you've worked with? I see that someone has run into Scope Creep Scotty from time to time. And the monopolizer. Yeah, so it's really important to recognize that not all stakeholders are the same, and they will come with different personalities, different challenges. Some of them might come with baggage, right? They have experiences in their history that shape their attitudes towards your project. So just be aware of that. I mean, you can't change what happened in the past, but you can build those relationships and try and understand what it is they're really thinking. So let's talk about a game plan to try and do that. Because I talked about a lot of difficult things, difficult situations, difficult people. Let's talk about how we can actually prepare for elicitation and conduct it effectively. So I like game plans. They don't always go to plan, but it's good to help rally your team around a game plan. And when you get your whole team paddling the boat in the same direction, you go a lot farther. So this is something that I always work on when I'm working on elicitation. So think about your elicitation objectives. Why do we want to take people away from their day jobs to come and talk to us and explain our requirements? What do we want to walk out of the room with? Personally, I've done requirements workshops where I actually had to travel to my stakeholders' offices. And, we had to be really laser focused on our objectives because it takes time and it takes money and it takes effort to get everyone in the same room together, to travel across the country to work on elicitation. So you want to be as efficient and effective as possible. So think about your objectives. As a BA, this is your prepare for elicitation piece. It's also your BA planning and monitoring piece. So we have to think about our business analysis work and plan that out. So think about your objectives. What are the gaps in your current knowledge of the solution objectives, for example? Do you want to be able to fill those in? Another thing that you have to do is to identify the stakeholders. So think about the stakeholders who can give input into your requirements. Also think about the stakeholders who are impacted by your solution. So think about the people who can influence the solution and the people who are impacted by the solution. So the end users, for example, or even if you're working in IT, for example, maybe you have to think about your IT service desk. They would be stakeholders as well. So think about who could be impacted or who could influence your solution. And there are different techniques in the BABOK in stakeholder analysis. One of my favorite techniques, and it's actually quite simple, is the stakeholder onion diagram. The stakeholder onion diagram is a set of concentric circles, and the inner layer of this onion is your project. Who is in your team that is working on the solution? And then the next layer out is who are the stakeholders, for example, the project sponsor or the users or the customer service reps or the IT service desk. These are the people who are outside your project, but they're the ones who are going to have to live with your solution long-term after the project is done. And then a third layer on this onion could be the external stakeholders. For example, the executives of the company, or it could be the regulators, policy makers or the lawmakers. They might have a stake in your solution. So for example, they might have some requirements related to policy or compliance. So you have to make sure that you take them into account. That's why it's so important to identify your stakeholders, because remember how I said you might not have access to the right stakeholders. So who are those right stakeholders? And that's the crux of that second bullet. The other point, the third point, is seek to understand. This is it's sort of a communication 101 point. Zip your lips and listen to what they're saying. Try to understand what they're saying before you pass any judgment on what they're saying. So you're not telling them the requirements wrong. You can keep asking probing questions to get to the root cause of the problem, for example. You could ask probing questions to see what could be some related requirements. Or you could identify additional stakeholders when you start asking questions. So try to understand the situation and the problem, because we know as BAs, we want to solve the right problem. So we're not just writing down requirements as we hear them. We're trying to understand the requirements. And part of that is active listening, right? We're not just writing down everything they're saying word by word. What we're doing is we're listening to the stakeholders and saying, yes, that's interesting. Could you explain more? Or, yes, that's interesting. I have a question about what you just said. So you're showing that you're engaged and you care about what they're explaining. And then finally, you also need to confirm the elicitation results. Make sure that you're walking out of the room with the correct information. And sometimes what you're walking out with aren't necessarily requirements. They could be other things like business rules. They could be other things like other stakeholder lists or lists of other stakeholders that you should be consulting. So everything that you wrote down on the whiteboard or on a cocktail napkin or took a picture of, what you want to do is before you leave that situation, you're going back to the stakeholders and saying, did I get this right? Is this what you said? Or this is what I heard. Is it correct? And that way you can make sure that you're not going to have to go back to them a second time and waste their time. And that way you're also demonstrating that you were doing active listening, that you weren't writing the requirements incorrectly. So confirming that, even doing it visually, really helps. Are there any questions or thoughts on that? Comments? Okay, so we understand how difficult elicitation can be and why that happens. We know who some of the difficult personalities are that we might encounter. We have a bit of a game plan here that's going to help us through the elicitation and collaboration knowledge area that the BABOK talks about. Let's talk about some techniques. Like, how do you actually do these things? So we know that the BABOK has 50 techniques. That's a lot of techniques. And I'm not suggesting that you do all of them. It's like, if you have a box of crayons, you wouldn't necessarily use every color in the crayon box to color a picture. You have to be selective in how you apply the techniques and when to apply them. So when you're doing elicitation, I've listed here maybe 10 or 12 different techniques. You don't have to do them all in one project. What I would recommend is think about your elicitation objectives. Why are you doing this elicitation? What do you want to walk out with? And then you could look at these different techniques. And you know that in the BABOK, there's a description of the technique, and it talks about the pros and cons of each technique. So you can take those into consideration to decide whether or not a particular technique is the right one to use. Or you can decide whether or not you need to use a combination of these different techniques. Let's look at let's discuss a few of these. And I think some of these might be quite familiar to you. Let's talk about some of the ones that might be less common. So we know about brainstorming. Another way to do brainstorming is mind mapping. I find that mind mapping is extremely useful This is where you're drawing diagrams and you're connecting different ideas together through a network of links. And the benefit of doing mind mapping is it's really free flowing, and you can get your stakeholders to give you a lot of ideas, and you're connecting them all together. So in a visual sense, everyone remembers these things, right? Let's look at business rules analysis. So we talk about gathering requirements, eliciting requirements. Another thing we have to consider is business rules. We do have to take into consideration business rules because these are the rules that are hard and, well, they should be hard and fast, regardless of whether using a technology solution or a people solution or a process solution. Business rules are supposed to always be applicable. So for example, you could be talking about sales tax rates or HST, GST. Those rules tell you how much percentage tax to charge on goods and services. Whether someone is paying by credit card or cash or debit card, that business rule says this is a percentage tax we are supposed to charge. So that's a hard and fast rule. These are the things that as BAs we should remember to ask about business rules, because our the subject matter experts out there amongst your stakeholders, they're going to know these business rules, and they can explain to you these are the rules that we must obey within the solution, or that the solution needs to support. Let's talk about another solution, another technique. How about observation? Does anyone want to use the raise hand icon, the raise hand reaction in Zoom to say whether or not you use observation or chat? Okay, I will talk about Sailboat in a sec. Has anyone used observation, or do you use it often? According to the BABOK, observation means that you're actually observing how someone is performing a business function. I find that when we actually do an observation, we get a lot more rich information than if the person were to explain how they do a specific task. So when you're doing observation, you can see the nuances in the business process. And there are different ways to do observation. The book talks about watching them do the task. And it also talks about asking them questions as they're doing that task. Why do you flip that switch when this thing happens? So you can interact with them as well. Observation gives you some interesting information about how they actually perform a task. So that's why I find observation is useful, because sometimes people aren't very good at explaining things, right? They don't always mean what they say, and they don't say what they mean. So when you look at a group of people or you're looking at data, it helps to explain things. And you can use this to supplement the other techniques. And let's look at collaborative games. If you Google collaborative games, you can see there are different ways to engage with stakeholders to get them to participate. And they love using the word co-create the requirements, work together with you to tell you what the solution is going to look like. And for example, you could do things like sailboat. And the sailboat technique is where you have a whiteboard, whether it's a physical whiteboard or a virtual whiteboard. You draw a picture of a boat with a sailboat, and you draw the surface of the water. And what you do is you give your stakeholders in the room a bunch of sticky notes and pens, and you ask them to give their opinion on something. And the warm-up exercise I always do with sailboat is, okay, everybody, I want you to give me your opinion of Hawaiian pizza, because everyone has an opinion of Hawaiian pizza. So what they'll do is they'll write on their sticky notes their opinions about Hawaiian pizza. And the opinions that are favorable to it, they put it high in the sky to represent the wind in the sails that push the sailboat forward. The things that they hate about Hawaiian pizza, they write on a sticky note and put it down at the bottom of down under the sailboat, like it's an anchor weighing the boat down. And I know this sounds silly, but it's a really good practice exercise to get people to give their opinions about something, because everyone has an opinion. And this can be kind of anonymous because they're just writing on sticky notes, and they'll plug in their thoughts on something. And you would be amazed at how many sticky notes people will put up there in 5 minutes. You can tell them to plaster the whiteboard with things that they like, things that they don't like, or things that they're neutral about. Things that they're neutral about, they would put just on the surface of the water. And what you do is you get all these ideas, and then you walk up to the whiteboard and you can start reading out some of these comments. And then you can start grouping things together. And the purpose of doing this sailboat exercise is to understand people's likes and dislikes about a particular solution. They could say, let's say in IT speak, I wish we had a mobile app version of this app. So they could stick the sticky note down below the surface of the water. When you start seeing collections of requirements like that, it's going to help you understand what they like and what they don't like about the current solution or the future solution. And then you can adjust your solution accordingly. So it's a really fun game to do. You can ask them about, you can ask them how they liked or didn't like a solution that was implemented, and you'll get a lot of input that way. So as I was saying, there are 10 or 12 techniques here. You shouldn't use them all in one shot, but you can use one or a combination of these different techniques. And it's really helpful to go back to the BABOK and read what these techniques are about, understand the pros and cons of them, because remember, we have different kinds of stakeholders, and some stakeholders might be more receptive to different techniques. So it's useful to understand these techniques and know which tool to use in which situation. Are there any questions or comments? Okay. I know I talked a lot about elicitation and I crammed your head full of ideas. I don't want to overload you too much, but I just want to leave you with some final thoughts. Prepare, prepare, prepare. You don't want to waste people's time when you're doing elicitation. So think about what you're trying to achieve by doing the elicitation activity. And from there, you can formulate what tasks and techniques and stakeholders you're going to be working with. Set expectations. So tell people how much time this is going to take. Tell people what you're going to do with their input, because stakeholders hate it when they work with you, they give you all this input and then you completely ignore what they said. So set expectations, explain to them how their involvement helps to shape the solution. Ask open-ended questions and closed-ended questions. For those of you who are studying for IIBA certification, you might know when to use open-ended or closed questions. The idea is you're using open-ended questions to get as much input as possible and understand different perspectives. And you're using closed questions to steer people in a certain direction. So for example, if you have that person who goes off on a tangent, you could ask them a closed question. You could say, does that requirement fit within the scope of our solution? And they may say no. So what you can do is, let's write it down and we're not going to throw it away, but we're just going to park it. So that's a closed question. Does it fit? What about understanding the elicitation results? So elicitation results are simply things people told you, right? They're requirements. They could be assumptions. They could be constraints. Someone could say, we have a constraint that the solution must cost X. Or we have a constraint in that we cannot implement during this time frame because we're busy with our fiscal year end at that point. So they could be telling you things that are requirements, assumptions, constraints, concerns. They could be telling you lots of different things. So understand that elicitation results are not a deliverable. So these are not part of your actual solution. They help shape your solution, but they're not the thing that your project sponsor is paying you for. You actually have to be able to deliver on the work. The other important thing is to understand that elicitation is continuous. You find that as you dig a little deeper, you're going to come up with more questions. And this often happens when you're just at the beginning of a project and you only have high-level information. When you start talking to more people, when you start doing more observation, when you start looking at documentation and understanding business rules, it's going to form more questions. So you need to set the expectation with your stakeholders that you might need to come back to them for clarification. So it's always a continuous elicitation. Also with elicitation, let's get away from this whole waterfall approach where we gather requirements at the beginning and we baseline the requirements, we hand it to the people who are going to build the solution, and then we keep going. What if we actually did elicitation throughout the whole life cycle of the project? What if we elicited information, it formulated requirements, we talked to the solution providers, they came up with more questions, we go back to the stakeholders and get clarification? Or what if the solution's being built and tested? We could also do some elicitation during that phase as well. We can elicit people's responses to the pilot. So it's important to realize that we can do elicitation at any point in a project. And of course, confirm and use the results. So I talk about confirm the elicitation results. Did I hear what you said? Did I get it correct? And then make sure that you actually use those elicitation results that are in scope for the solution. Don't just put those elicitation results on the shelf and do something else. So this is really a sign of respect for your stakeholders. So that maybe for a future project, they will be more receptive to business analysis and more cooperative when you're doing elicitation, because they know that you're listening and they know that you're actually using the information that they're giving you. So this is a lot of information. I know that I've made the slides available to the chapter if they want to share with you. I'm perfectly happy with that. And if you would like to connect with me, I'm also on LinkedIn. And I open the floor to any questions or comments or any thoughts. What are some nuggets that you learned here? Okay.
Don't be shy.
Everyone's just digesting everything.
Yeah.
Great presentation. Thank you. Well, thank you for attending. I hope that people will be able to take some of this information and apply it tomorrow.
I think there's some questions in the chat.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've kind of gone through those. I think Kathy has a question. What is the collaborative game sailboat?
Oh yeah, I did explain
think that
it.
was- I think that was explained already.
Yeah, okay,
Let
perfect.
me see if I can share that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like this. Am I sharing PowerPoint right now?
Yes, you are.
Do you see a sailboat?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so draw a picture of a sailboat somewhere, either in on a whiteboard or on a virtual whiteboard. And what you can do is you can take these sticky notes and you get your stakeholders to put their opinions here. You could say something like, the stakeholder might say, app is too slow. Or they could say something
Never heard of that before.
Of the look and feel.
That definitely no, never.
You could say something like annoying chat bot. So people will plug their sticky notes on here and they would say, you know, whoops. So they would say whether or not they like the solution or they hate the solution, and they would just plot it up high or down low, depending on their degree of like or dislike of that feature or solution. And when your whole whiteboard gets plastered with these sticky notes, you'll have it's like a survey, right? You're getting your stakeholders' opinions of something. So that's how Sailboat works.
Got it.
So it's kind of fun. I always find that stakeholders in an actual physical workshop where you have the whiteboard and the sticky notes, everyone's afraid to go up to the whiteboard and put their thing on. They just don't want to be watched. So I always use the Hawaiian pizza example as a practice version of the Sailboat, because I know everyone's got an opinion of Hawaiian pizza. I say, okay, now that we've done that, let's do Sailboat again based on the solution we're working on. So I find that it's a really fun technique.
Sure is. That's pretty good.
Are there
Other
any
questions?
Yeah.
Yeah, other questions from people?
Let's look at some of these other things.
What there are two questions in the chat.
Okay, so personality types and game plan. Yeah. So these are some things to be aware of as BAs, and our job isn't easy. And I'm not expecting you to take this presentation and that it's a silver bullet for everything, all the challenges that you face. But as BAs, it's really important to be aware of these different challenges so that, we get stronger and stronger as we try to overcome them. And then what methods do I use to document requirements effectively? Well, it depends on what the solution is going to be. Is it a technological solution? Is it a software application, or is it a business process? So, for example, if we're talking about business process, I worked on a project where the manager of these two staff members said, I don't know why they're always my workers are always so burnt out. Why is it that they are working till 2 o'clock in the morning trying to get things done? I really don't understand why they're so inefficient. So what I do, or what I did with my colleague, is we didn't jump into any technology solutions. What we did was we tried to understand step by step, what are the steps that they perform in the process. So we simply started a Visio swim lane diagram on screen, and we plotted out the steps in the process flow diagram. And they told us step by step what happens. Turns out that this process flow was 17 pages long, and we saw many duplicate tasks. Oh, why are you doing that step again? Well, it's because some information that we needed to do that step got lost. So depending on the type of business problem that you're trying to solve, if it's business process, like why is this process taking so long? Or, can we add more bodies to this? You would do something like a swim lane diagram. If it's something like an IT solution, right? So this is where you would work on solution requirements, where they're like functional requirements, non-functional requirements. You could do some prototyping. For me, I hate to say this, but the low-tech solution way of capturing requirements is Excel. It's not fun. Sometimes it's sort of tedious to do a requirements traceability matrix in Excel. If your client or you have the budget to have a requirements management solution like Jira or Blueprint, where you can actually capture all that information and link it together and keep these requirements in a database, then of course that's a better way to do it. But you know what? Everybody has Excel. It's low technology. You can share the file with anyone. It just means it is more work for the BA to manage the life cycle of those requirements. So you're going to have to pay a lot of attention to how you link requirements. In terms of other things like assumptions, constraints, concerns, sometimes for me, it's as easy as throwing a blank PowerPoint slide on screen and typing out bullet points. Tell me what you're really thinking. And I type them out on screen live. And when they see that information on screen as I'm typing it out, they start to realize how maybe sometimes some requirements sound ridiculous, or some requirements are more important, and they can elaborate on them. So this is listening, active listening, and capturing the requirements in a live situation. So for me, the most often it's process flow diagrams, bulleted lists on PowerPoint, and some kind of requirements management solution, whether it's Jira or for example, Microsoft Dynamics or even Excel, right? Capture what they're telling you. Sometimes these things turn out not to be requirements, but you still need to write them down. Let me see here what else people are asking. I hope that answers the question. Please re-ask or elaborate if you have other questions. Do I use other collaborative games? Yeah, so there are some other interesting collaborative games. So for example, I haven't used this one, but something called Cereal Box. If you ever looked at a cereal box, the size of the cereal box explain the features of the cereal, then it's got the ingredient lists and the nutrition information. So what you could do is work with your stakeholders to say, okay, we're going to be building a solution. What are the features? What are the ingredients of this thing? What are the business rules that may govern the solution? So you get them to design everything, and it's got to fit in this nice package, like 4-sided box, so that people don't go off on a tangent and give you information that might not be relevant to your solution. So, there's that thing. There's also, here's one that I like. When I'm working with stakeholders who have been burned in the past, I use something called My Worst Nightmare. So when we're engaging on a project and we're working on a solution that is really kind of an experiment, and they really don't know, we're going to try something new and we really don't know if it's going to work. Of course, you can do agile and fail fast and learn from your mistakes. But another thing that you do is you phrase a set of questions to your stakeholders and say, hey, Joe, or hey, Mary, or hey, Bob, what's your worst nightmare about the solution? Because there you're asking them to explain personally what is their worst nightmare. And once you know what the worst nightmare is, now you know the things you need to avoid when doing the solution. So those are things to consider. You can do cereal box, My Worst Nightmare, sailboat. There's also prototyping. So you could, if you're doing an IT solution, you can prototype and do wireframes, what the solution would look like. And I think there was a video that came out some time ago on YouTube where a fellow was hand drawing what the screens would look like in an application. And they actually had the stakeholder physically point or click on hand-drawn buttons on the mock-up, like the yes, no, cancel buttons. And if they clicked yes, then the business analyst would show a specific page. If they clicked no, they would show a different mock-up. So I actually showed how the person would interact with the solution. And then the stakeholder could cross things out and say, no, it looks different this way. So you can actually get them to physically play with the prototype. That's another type of collaborative game, is to do prototyping. Do I have any elicitation horror stories? I would say the most difficult challenge I have with elicitation is the silent Sally, the person who doesn't tell you anything and you feel like you're both sitting in the room and wasting each other's time. This is the person who doesn't give you any information. You're wondering, why are you here? So I try to draw it out from them, try to get some information from them. Sometimes I try to just strike up a conversation about something else, do some small talk just to get them to just to get them to interact, and you build that trust. But then I also find that if I'm not getting anywhere, I would say, thank you very much. Is there someone else who might be able to give us more information about this question? So you don't give up, but you try to keep probing and find out other sources where you can get the information. Let me see what else you got here. How do you make sure documentation management doesn't become an overwhelming task? Okay, so Mary, if you want to chime in, do you mean document management or requirements management? In either case, as BAs, we're working with vast amounts of information, right? We're working with documents management. Okay, so we're working with lots of information, lots of pieces of things. Yes, it can be challenging to make sure that you have everything available to you. I do work on a lot of, I try to organize repositories of information, whether it's creating a useful page of useful links. What I could do is create a page that has hyperlinks to all these different documents. So it's one way to have the information at hand. And what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to put in the chat a book that I recently read. It's called Build a Second Brain. I don't know if anyone has ever heard of this. Please raise your hand in Zoom if you've heard of it. Oh, Tim, thank you for saying that you have it. Have you read it? And it is by Tiago Forte. So this is a really interesting book. Some of his, oh, hi, Miriam. Thank you for chiming in on that. He has an interesting way of organizing information. I don't necessarily agree with all of his perspectives, but I think he's got some extremely useful tips on how to collect information, organize it, synthesize it, and have it ready for when you need it. Because, you know, we're bombarded with lots of information. Maybe a piece of information that we receive today might not be useful today, but it could be useful 2 weeks from now when we work on a different part of a solution. So he's got a way of intaking all this information in a rapid format. At the end of the day, you just organize them as best as you can. And then he talks about hyperlinking or creating keywords against all these different ideas so that later on you can do a keyword search. It's meta tags. He creates meta tags for all these different pieces of information so that you can always have the information at the tip of your fingers. And as a BA, you're not freaking out with the vast amounts of information. You know you've captured it. You can have peace of mind that you wrote it down and that it's there, it's written down. Even if you don't need it right now, it's available. So this book it's a really interesting way. It talks about an interesting way of incorporating all this information and having it available to you when you need it. Let me see what else we got here. How do you handle ambiguities or conflicting requirements during the elicitation process? I'll start with the conflicting requirements. Sometimes conflicting requirements might come from different stakeholder groups. So finance doesn't always agree with procurement. So what I try to do as the BA is to be the mediator. When I'm in a workshop or when I'm doing elicitation activities, I set the expectation and I explain to them that it's, you know, I'm trying to talk to many different stakeholder groups and I'm trying to get the different perspectives to see how we can come up with a solution that tries to meet as many requirements as we can. And I explain to them, sometimes requirements for one person might not be requirements for someone else. So I set that expectation. You know, finance has this specific requirement. Maybe in your procurement world, it's not relevant to you, but I explain to them, it is important. These are business rules that we have to support through these requirements. So that's how I gain their buy-in into letting others speak. Now, when you have one stakeholder group that's giving requirements that conflict with each other. Like they're basically contradicting themselves. The most effective technique, or the most effective approach I do, is I write down the requirements, or I've collected these requirements, written them down, and then I ask these people, explain to me the process, the business process, step by step, and how these requirements support each of those steps. And then it helps you identify if there's a requirement that doesn't really fit into this process, even though they told us that that's a requirement. So you can find out the odd requirement that's conflicting with everything else. Or perhaps it is a brand new requirement that seems to conflict with everything else. You do need to do some more investigation. You do need to understand, why is that requirement required? So you're doing all that discovery. And that's your job as the BA. Sometimes it will be challenging to find a requirement that can work with everything else. This is where you would work with the solution builders and put your heads together and see if we can come up with something that would satisfy the set of requirements, even though it sounds like these requirements are conflicting. So you would work with your solution builders, solution developers, and your stakeholders, talk about the different business processes, the different scenarios and use cases to see how we can make this thing work. So that's the conflicting part of it. And then the ambiguity part of it is the easiest way for me to decrease ambiguity is, okay, so you've expressed this requirement. Can you explain to me how we would actually test this requirement? Because the people who test this, they need specifics, right? They need to know, is the solution going to pass or fail? And that's how you can narrow down the ambiguity. How would this requirement work, and how are we going to test this thing? If you tell me that a solution needs to be user-friendly, what do you mean by user-friendly? User-friendly for this person might not be the same as user-friendly for somebody else. So what you do is you talk to these stakeholders and find out what would be the acceptance criteria that would meet that requirement. So you're clarifying things and you're reducing the ambiguity. I hope that helps. I think I made it sound easy, but it's not always easy. You have to do this iteratively and continuously. But you do find, like, as you do this, it's as a BA, as you practice this, it does get easier. Are there any questions? Anything else? Okay, so I think I will hand the floor back to the chapter if you would like to jump in.
Thank you, Emily. I think that was great. We appreciate your time and we appreciate your effort in getting us acquainted again with some of these elicitation techniques. And thank you everyone from the community who joined today and participated and asked questions. I hope everyone's kind of benefited from the time that Emily spent walking us through all of those techniques as well as the content today. So Emily, thank you again for making time for us, and we appreciate you, and we appreciate you spending the time with us here today.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. You make elicitation look so simple. Looking forward to more sections from you in the nearest future. Thank you.
You're welcome. I thank the Vancouver chapter for the opportunity, and I love being part of your community this evening.
So,
Emily.
don't miss our upcoming event okay. Stay tuned and don't miss our upcoming event for June 13, 2024. We'll be having a study section. Stay updated with the latest news and events by visiting our website and follow us on all social media. Thank you for being part of our vibrant business analysis community. And sorry, trying to. Okay. So we kindly request and June 27, 2024 speaker section, a structured, intuitive and visual way of planning and tracking your individual personal development plan. Thank you for supporting IIBA Vancouver. We also like to call upon each one of you to complete the survey, the link for which will be sent in a thank you email shortly. Thank you, everyone. Thank you in advance for participation and do have a good night. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I hope everyone has a nice evening and connect with me on LinkedIn.
Thanks again.
And thank you, Eno, thank you, Sid, thank you,
You're
Kathy.
welcome.
Thank you, everyone at the Vancouver chapter. I love helping out fellow chapters.
Oh, thank you so much.
All right. Would you like me to drop off or stay on?
Do you want to stay on?
Sure.
Okay.
You might want to stop recording.
Okay, yeah. Okay, I'll stop recording.